Here is a General Electric W something whatever. I'll put it in the video box when somebody tells me what the model number is in the comments. 3-speed box VN. This is one of the earlier plastic bladed models because it still has this type of guard where the guard goes in vertically, whereas the later ones the guard pushed in horizontally. I picked this up recently on the Face Rip You Off, Steal Your Data, Provide No Support marketplace. It was free on the curb, which is always a bit of a gamble because at any time somebody could stop and pick it up. But I did some checking out of the street prior to going, and it was a very quiet side road, little to no through traffic. So I figured it was worth the half-an-hour trip to see if it would potentially still be there for free. The listing appeared on the computer very late at night, and I went early the next morning, and sure enough it was still there, right on the curb as described. So for the cost of the wear on the vehicle and maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes of driving, here is the General Electric 3-speed window box van. This one will be going to the letter H. I've got a handful of these now, and I know he's been wanting one, so I told him the next one I found I will give him, and this is the next one I found, so this is the one I will give him. The listing described this as a 3-speed electrically reversible model. I knew that's not what it was based off of the pictures. The badge on the reversible models would say 3-speed electrically reversible, and there would be a reversing switch on the side underneath the speed control. I found it very interesting that the person who wrote the description said 3-speed electrically reversible, just as it would be written on the actually reversible models. It's almost as if the person might have had several instances of these back in the day, and perhaps some of them were in fact electrically reversible. The handle is busted off on this one, which unfortunately is becoming a pretty common issue. But at some point somebody put a small piece of rope in its place, and for what it's worth it actually works quite well. When I first saw this I was concerned about the rope potentially entering the path of the blades, but it doesn't seem like it's long enough that it would really want to do that. So despite not looking the best, it's actually a pretty good solution. Another common problem that's developing with these units is the cord will fray where it goes into the strain relief here from the flexing. The one that my grandfather had did that as well. He had to replace the cord at some point. This one does not seem to be suffering from that problem. In fact, the cord looks to be in perfectly good condition still. And I do believe it's the original cord. The 3-speed control knob is still present, and on the reversible models there will be a slide switch that's stationed right here that would control the air intake or exhaust. The switch feels like it's in pretty good condition still, turns smoothly and quietly. I suspect no issues with that switch. All the wiring on this appears to be original still. The wrapping of the switch inside that plastic bag is in fact factory, and that looks to be the original tape still holding it in place. I'm not exactly sure why this is done. My guess would be for waterproofing. But then there's really nothing waterproof about the motor itself, so who knows. Maybe it was for dust resistance. It's hard to say how much use this has had over the years. There does appear to be some dust accumulated on the inside of the fins of the blade, and there's definitely some dust inside the motor, mostly over here. But the blades are quite clean. This was definitely cleaned at some point, and the person actually did a pretty good job, which is rare. There are some spots where you can tell it was brushed, but it wasn't thoroughly clean, like on the back of the motor here. And then there's some dust residue up in the top there. But overall, for assuming the person was a non-fan collector, this was a pretty good job cleaning. Definitely one of the better ones that I've seen. One of the original feet still remains, but the other three have fallen off. Unfortunately, the information tag is also gone, which typically happens after the feet fall off. The tag it was originally right there. You can see the difference in the color of the paint. It was right there. And this time it looks like it might have just fallen off, perhaps from moisture exposure. But a lot of times what happens is when the feet aren't there, the bottom of the fan sits on the floor and then it just wears off from being, from the friction of being moved when it gets put down or what have you. I'm guessing that this experienced a flood at some point, perhaps in a basement or in a garage. This clearly was sitting on the floor here for some time, and there are various rust spots, mostly just surface rust, nothing that a quick sanding and painting couldn't fix, throughout the fan. We can see some rust spots here on the top, a little wear on the paint there, and the guard definitely has some rust staining to it, as well as inside the frame there. It actually looks like this is kind of sun faded as well. You know what might be the case also is this could have been used near the ocean. It looks like there's a lot of kind of salt water or salt air or salt fog or smog or whatever the heck you call it. That type of corrosion and wear on the surface, that's what it looks like to me, is perhaps a salty air exposure. Let's go ahead and start this thing up. We're going to be testing at 120.4 volts. We'll begin on low. Okay, so that is all the windings. That is 1.85 the amps, 124 the watts, with a power factor of 0.56, which is abysmal. I'm going to kind of rush through this because I don't want to put any more minutes on this with the motor like that. It's up to speed, it's running strong, medium, 2.23 the amps, 157 the watts, power factor 0.59. It seems to be pretty copacetic for the moment. So that noise is, I believe it's the winding lamentations vibrating inside the motor. So the motor needs to be thoroughly revarnished before this should be used. It's hard to believe in comparison to what we have today, but these were not really good quality when they were new. And these motors, unfortunately, are known to be kind of dodgy. I believe they have aluminium windings, and the lamentations come loose over time, and the vibration causes the insulation to break down, and then you get a burnout condition, and you got to rewind the motor. These also are known to have bearing issues, not because of the bearings. Actually, the bearings are pretty brilliant design, but because the motor, or rather because the blade, was just so horrifically out of balance. These are actually, I would go as far as to say, worse in terms of balance than a lot of Lasco Air King products, which is really saying something. This one is bad, it's shaking bad, but it's not the worst one I've seen. I've seen ones that are much worse than this. The high, that is 3.91 amps, 280 watts, power factor is 0.59. Very powerful, very quiet, all things considered. If it wasn't for that dumb buzzing that's shaking all over the place here. Yeah, it's a shame it's like that, because it otherwise is running very strong. Looks like there's a chunk missing or something on the middle of the blade there. I'm sure this has never been oiled, and it's still spinning pretty freely. These have a unibearing motor. Instead of having a bearing in the front and a bearing in the back with your stator in the middle, the bearing runs through the middle of the stator, and it's probably at least 2.5 inches thick. And then the rotor, of course, is on the outside. But it's actually a brilliant design, because the surface area of the bearing is many times over what the typical surface area is with a standard motor, where you have two, one in the front and one in the back. So it's a brilliant design. Unfortunately, it wasn't paired with good, well-balanced blades. And so after 70 years of operation, which, mind you, is way more than GE ever intended these things to last, now the bearings are starting to wear out. And serviceability is pretty poor in these motors. There's no way to really add oil other than to drill a hole in the back and add oil manually. In GE's defense, these are still pretty common. There's plenty of these around. They're lasting a very long time, and for not having been oiled for 60, 70 years, still in pretty decent shape.